Hi, everybody. Tina Brock, Producing Artistic Director here at the Idiopathic Radiculopathy Consortium in Philadelphia. I'm your host for Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation. I do hope you'll join us the next 50 minutes. Sit back and relax as we explore the lives, the hearts, the minds, and the spirits of creators in Philadelphia region and around the world. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tina Brock. I'm your host on Into the Absurd, a virtually existential dinner conversation. And today we're going to be talking with Emily Brewton Schilling about her father's work, Jim E. Brewton, and pataphysics and memoirs. And it's going to be a great conversation with you involved. Thanks for being here. You can put your questions in the chat box for us today. If you're coming in on Facebook Live, thanks so much for being here with us since June. And we're going to be here even as we slowly think about a return to the stage and studios and rehearsal rooms and pages and places where art is made. We will be here talking about that art. It may not be Saturdays at 5, but we'll certainly let you know where we're going to be and when. On today's show, Emily Brewton Schilling. Emily is a writer, she is an artist, and she's the daughter of James E. Brewton, who is an avant-garde artist and pataphysician. And Emily is here today to talk about her journey and her search for her father's work, her memoirs, and what pataphysics is. So Emily Brewton Schilling, welcome to Into the Absurd.
Thank you so much, Tina. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is a story that we've been talking about for a little while as I've gotten to know you from the Philadelphia Avant-Garde Studies Consortium and a little bit about your father's work. And so I want to start, Emily, with your first feeling. I believe I read in your bio that you were in Florida at the time and you made the decision that you needed to find out more about your father's art and your father's work. Can you give us a little understanding of what that moment was like for you, that decision?
Thank you, Tina. It was, I guess looking back on it, it's kind of pataphysical and a little surreal that something so tiny had changed my life so profoundly. But I was standing over our recycling bin there in Florida, and I had the art news in my hand, and I was flipping through it to see if there were any pictures I wanted to save in case I wanted to collage them or something. And there was an ad that I had completely not noticed the first time around. And the magazine was maybe 6 months old. And it was an ad for a show that had already closed, and it was Michael R. Taylor's show of Thomas Chimes's work at the Philadelphia Museum of Art called A Life in Pataphysics. And I saw the word pataphysics, and the artwork behind you in your background, Tina, is the Pataphysics Times by my father, which I had seen, but I did not know it. I had not seen it in adulthood. I saw it once when I was a child. And as a child, I wasn't going to read all that type. It didn't interest me at all. I just walked right by it. But I remembered pataphysics, and I thought, pataphysics, another artist in Philadelphia in the 60s was interested in pataphysics. This is big news. And I turned on my heel and I went to my computer and I started digging away to find out more about the show and what was behind this pataphysician and his art. So that's how it all began.
So how old were you at this time?
I guess in my early 40s. I want to say I still count on my fingers. So math isn't my
So you were an adult and living and working in Florida, and your father passed when you were quite young.
Yeah, he died when I was 4.5, and the whole background setup was sort of complicated in that he and my mother were never married, but they were together from maybe about 1961 to 64 or 65 with a breakup in the middle, I think. And then, so I was born in 62 when they were together the first time. They were in Denmark, they came back to Philadelphia, and they broke up maybe when I was 2-ish. And then my father became my caretaker because my mother worked at an advertising agency 5 days a week, and my father was a painter. So as a little kid, I got to hang out in the studio. He let me draw on his paintings. As you can see from the work behind me, he was very into Cobra art, which is a movement from, I think it was started in 1948 in Northern Europe, saying that everyone is an artist and that art should be childlike. And Karl Appel and Asger Jorn and Corneille were big proponents of that art style. So that's why we were in Denmark. My father went out to go hang around with them. And so I got to paint with him all day. He let me paint on his canvases, and it was just really fun. And so when he died, my mother used to like to say that I didn't remember him and, I was too little. But at 4.5, I think we remember stuff. And I certainly was devastated. I mean, I was just doomed. It was awful. He was a lovely man. And so that was really very difficult. And then growing up, I would always get hysterical if anybody tried to talk to me about him, his sister, friends of the family. I would cry, and they would back away quickly and never mention him again. And my mother never wanted to talk about him. So because I cried and it upset me, I didn't know. I grew up in ignorance, and I can still cry about it, but that doesn't mean I don't want to know, what his life was like, or what does this person have to tell me? So there was a lot to learn when I finally started pushing.
So those years between when you were a child and your father passed, and then when you made this discovery when you were in Florida, was of memories of him, of the years that you had together painting, but not a lot of information about the work that existed or the depth and breadth of what he created when he was alive. Is that fair to say? You were
Absolutely. I knew of, between relatives and friends of his from the academy, he had gone to PAFA and was close friends with Dan Miller and Joseph Amoratico and a few other great guys there. I knew of about 16 paintings, and maybe 3 or 4 works were in our house. So that's all I knew.
So was it through your association with Michael and the show or this discovery of the art news that you decided, is that what set you off on the journey to learn more?
Yes, and people had started to send me things like his widow, the lady who was married to him for 100 days, tried to contact me, but she was also a little odd, and she talked to him on a Ouija board a lot and called people with the results of these talks shortly after he had died. So there's his sister, whose mother had just died. Then Jim had killed himself, distraught. And suddenly Jim's widow of 100 days is calling saying I'm talking to him on the Ouija board, and he's asking me to go look in the closet for some papers. You can imagine people weren't welcoming her calls. So when she called our house and she had something to tell me, I was all for it. But I remember my mother came running in, grabbed the phone out of my hand, cried, "Never call this house again," and slammed it down, and then flew away back into the kitchen. And I was just left there on the couch. I think I was about 11 at the time. And then a few people would give me artwork occasionally. Helen Siegel, who was married to Ted Siegel, both of them members of the PAFA community, and Ted was the conservator there. She had a lovely painting, and it's the one that you used as the background for the email that went out about this picture of 3 children. She contacted me in maybe 1986 and said, "I have a painting. Would you like to have it?" And of course I would. there were other situations where people had his things and they went to either my stepfather, Mark Schilling, or my mother and said, do you think Emily would like this? And I'm gathering that my parents said, no, she's not interested at all. Like, I remember, I've been very lucky that there were two big stashes of his possessions, one of possessions and one of artwork. And the artwork was preserved by his friends, Patricia and Ronald Weingrad in Philadelphia. They just basically emptied his studio and put everything in their basement or on their walls, and it was safe and waiting for me when I got it in 2011, when they were kind enough to give it to me. But in the meanwhile, they, when I called my stepfather, Mark, and said, and Patty Weingrad says they have all these things in their basement that they've been saving all these years. I was like, hallelujah. And he said, oh yes, Patty's been telling me for years that you should come and clean out her basement. I just ignored her, of course. And I thought, of course.
Yeah, so the of course part, what do you think was the impetus behind the don't call this house again? Or, was it protection from, for you? Or
I think it was anger on my mother's part. She was heartbroken, angry, really, really resented his dying like that. I don't know if he was probably one of the great love affairs of her life. And she wrote a couple of short stories about it, which I didn't see until maybe 2010, but she published them. I mean, one was in Ladies' Home Journal and the other was in some equally national magazine. And they were heartbroken stories about, breakup with this artist named Jay, and described him, and how even if they couldn't be together, some kind of secret neurotic bond would always remain, which of course he severed when he killed himself. So she had her own issues there, and I think also wanted to protect me a bit from like his widow, who was possibly going to say some odd things if she was talking to him on a Ouija board like that. So, yeah, I think it was their own everybody's got problems with a suicide. You wish you had known, what could you have done? As adults, we think that. As a child, you think, was it my fault? You wonder. You also grow up, in my experience and experience of people that I know this has happened to, you tell yourself these myths, like this was going to happen, or this was going to happen, or you're actually lied to by the adults to make it an easier pill to swallow. And so you don't know what the truth is anymore. And I've learned on this journey to ask the same questions of everybody over and over again, even if I think I know the answer, because everybody has a different story.
Is the journey, would you say, in equal parts to discover and uncover the art, as well as to paint the picture in your own mind of who this man was?
I think my main feeling was just absolutely militantly believing that he must not be forgotten. That was the first piece. And when I composed my first letter to Michael Taylor, who is the patron saint of the James Edward Brewton Foundation, I thought, what do I want for Jim? And what I wanted was for people to see the art and people to love the art. It was amazing that, when you write a curator at a big museum, do you expect to hear back from them ever? I didn't. And he called me, and he's been absolutely wonderful ever since in helping me to discover more stuff. So for me, more it was save the artwork. And it's kind of a desperation to it, like, because I knew it was in basements if it was anywhere. I didn't know what I would find at all. But when I started finding things, I realized these things are in people's barns. They're being, defecated upon by the chickens. I must save this now. His generation are in their 80s, and it's time to grab the stuff before, people inherit it and think it's junk or throw it out.
Did you have any sense of how vast how vast and wide it was? So how did you begin?
I remember the first person I called, Michael wrote back to me and called and said, you should start looking for the art sooner rather than later. So I had an obituary, and I had, there were 2 memorial shows, one in 1968 at Kenmore Galleries, and that was at Peel House at PAFA, and one in 1971 at Kenmore Galleries. And I had the catalog or list of works and who owned them from the 1968 PAFA show. So I looked at that, and there are all these unfamiliar names, and there were a few familiar names. And I decided I would write rather than call because I'm afraid of the telephone. And I looked up Harry Kulkowitz, who was the gallery owner of the Kenmore Galleries, and he had supported my father, and I knew that. So somehow, he was in the obituary as quoted. And so I started writing a letter to him saying, you'll be surprised to hear from me, but I am Jim Brewton's daughter. And as I keyed that in, I looked over my shoulder and I thought, I hope nobody sees me doing this. I hope no one catches me. And that's when I realized how far underground I had taken my love for my father, because I had to hide that from my mother. So it was a big mess. I had to hide it from her because it always made her very angry whenever I mentioned him. So I sat there with that for a minute, and I thought, okay, this is going to be really hard. And as opposed to when I was younger and just hysterical about him, this concept of constructive mourning was really what it helped me more than I knew it was going to, because it was no fun for the first 5 years. It really was very painful, but I was finding things, and as I was rescuing it, I was feeling less desperate that it was going to, be lost or destroyed. And I just began to enjoy the journey a little more, and the people, the characters, the people who had loved him. He had collectors, they had stories about him. There were a couple of reporters who knew him, so they had done stories about him that were really interesting about the artwork or funny about him as a person. And so these were all amazing treasures for me. So it got more enjoyable, but at first it was hard. But what I did learn was that instead of just turning into a hysterical mush, I can actually do something constructive. I can work on this project while crying. It's okay. I can do that.
And was it hard the first 5 years, mostly, do you think, mostly because you were mourning, or because you were concerned about going against, the wishes of other people in your family, or both?
So I think a little bit of both. I was afraid for the artwork, but I think the emotions that kicked in were more like, save this. And you can't save a person who is dead. And so that was kind of conflated in my mind. And the pictures, when I see them on other people's walls, especially at first, I kind of think, that's mine. Excuse me, I'll just be removing that from your wall and taking it home. Thank you very much. Just because they're like little brothers and sisters to me in a way. So, yeah.
Can you pick your father's works? Can you identify them out of a, say, a previously unknown work, or do you feel like you pretty much have a good handle on everything he's done? I just wondered if you're ever stumped.
I have to look into every possibility. It's a really good question, Tina. I've had people have occasionally emailed me and said, there's a whole bunch of art signed Brewton that's right now at a Chelsea place. Run down and have a look. And so I will run down and have a look. I'll run down and have a look at anything. And I remember seeing some pictures that were signed Brewton in a similar signature. There were bicycle tires and newspapers attached to them. They looked very much like something, but there was something unmusical about them. I didn't think they were by him. And I looked at the back and it was by some lady named Brewton. So it wasn't him. Janet Newholm, the American wife of Eric Newholm, they were the couple who sheltered my parents in Denmark in 1962, and also good friends of Asger Jorn and some of the Cobra artists. When I went to go visit her, she had an array of paintings out, and she said, "Can you pick your father's out from There were Jorn's there and some of Eric's works, and Eric's works I could tell, but I couldn't.
Mm-hmm. I just wondered if there were, he was young, was he not, when he passed in his 39?
36.
36. And had been painting since he was a child?
I think he was genuinely talented, but he took time. He had some art lessons, and then when he was 21, he seems to have enlisted in the Marines during the Korean War, and I still can't quite get my head around that because he was very much an anti-war protester. But in 1951, he enlisted, and I think that he was either running away from some kind of trouble. He had a lousy factory job at the time, and I think he was looking to the GI Bill to put him through art school, because the minute he demobbed, or demobbed, I don't know how you say that, but the minute they released him, he was off to Ruskin School of Art in Oxford, same time as John Updike was there. So he had I think that would be one major reason why he would enlist like that, because
in addition to feeling this burning need to collect and to make sure that you round up as much of his art as you can, what are the big questions that you have a desire to deal with? Are they is the memoir, I guess the better question is the memoir, why the memoir?
I started taking notes immediately when I was finding stuff, because naturally you would keep records of interviews. At first, everybody I talked to had several other people I would need to talk to, and leads on paintings. So I'm of course writing all of this down, and then some of the people had really funny things to say, stories, and so I was writing those down. And then I remember there was a time when somebody contacted me and said they had, was this the man they meant? They had his Marine stuff and some other, I don't know, something else that made me realize that this was a relative of his widow's. And they had all this stuff, and they emailed me once and said, "We have this stuff, do you want it?" And I wrote back quickly, but not so quickly that they would think I was insane, but eagerly, normal, not too driven and crazy for this stuff. And they never wrote back, and it made me crazy. I could Google them and I could see where they lived, and I knew they had puppies for sale and their kid was, raising money for school, and I lived too far away to show up on their doorstep, and I didn't know what would be there, like letters, things that belonged to, like, his personal things. Later I was able to, another of the relatives got in touch with me, and I was able to retrieve all of that stuff, and I'm so grateful to them. That was Patricia Wright. And in the meantime, though, I had all this frustration, and, you know, I had to say goodbye to what those things were and tell myself I was no worse off than I was before I had heard from them. And I took that aggression and I turned it to the writing, because you know, anger is energy and you may as well use it. I learned that from a wise friend. When you're angry, do some work, creative work. So that's what I mean.
Are there specific? I just keep getting this image of a you know, like a sculpture, or creating a sculpture where you're trying to sort of shape it or figure out what it is. Is that the search in addition to the art? Is it to have your own picture of him as a person?
That would have been lovely, yeah. And he left very little written behind. And that's a sadness. Apparently he wrote a note before he killed himself, and his widow was upset by it and destroyed it before the police came. And back then, I think it was very definitely a police matter. I mean, suicide was possibly even illegal. I don't know. But anyway, no one will ever know what that note said. And at one point, Patricia Wright, who had the personal items, it was as if the widow had just scooped everything from his bureau drawer, his medicine cabinet, all of the things from his studio that were at home. She saved them. And this lady, who was a stranger, as we were saying before the show began, the kindness of strangers, she didn't know who Jim was. She didn't know who I was. This was nothing to do with her relative, who was not even on that side of the family. So she looked up on the internet and found someone who might care about these Brewton things. And she contacted me and said, come on out to our house and help me go through all this stuff. And that's where the more personal things came. But it's more like a silhouette than it is. He's still a cipher.
Mm-hmm. How is the journey so far? And you said I think you mentioned you've been working on the memoirs for quite a while now, right? You began 2009, was it?
Something like that.
And has been a journey. What would you say you've learned about yourself?
How little I know. At first I thought, well, let me write a biography of my father. It'll be great and people will want to see his art. And then I realized that I'll never be able to date all these pictures, and there's nothing, he didn't leave anything terribly personal behind as far as any writings are concerned or anything. So I have anecdotes by his friends, but you can't build a biography on that. There's very little on anything to do with any of his life before Ruskin even. And so I had to throw that out the window, and that took a couple of years of writing. And then I thought, well, let me become an expert on surrealism and all of the Fluxus and, Dada and all of the movements that he was involved with. And then it wasn't too long before I realized that it was a little late in life to try to become an expert on all this modern art history, and that I should let the modern art historians take that. And so then I kind of cobbled together a draft, and I showed it to a cousin, Julie Wittes-Schlack, who has a book coming out in December called Burning and Dodging. And she said, you have to make yourself the heroine of this, even if you don't want to. Your father is dead and we can't root for him, but we can root for you. So I stepped back for a while, and I thought, well, I want to entertain people. This story has tragedy, but in the end, the story doesn't end with his suicide anymore. Thanks to the fact that he left all this art, the fact that this art still looks terrific. I mean, if I didn't like the art, I probably would not be nearly as enthusiastic, but I absolutely adore it. And so now the story doesn't end there with his death. And that makes it such a much better story. And some of the things that have happened to me along the way are hilarious.
On the search, is part of the story your search for the art?
Yeah, and things that, like, just ridiculous situations I've found myself in. I remember my stepfather had two artworks, and they were a portrait of Modigliani and a portrait of Poe, and they had been in his house forever. And he was threatening to sell them all the time. And you don't want anyone unloading these things on the local auctioneers and have them go for $100. If anything, that's just not right. So I was always in fear that he would get rid of those paintings. And besides which, it's very mean to be threatening something like that. Very, very mean. So in 2011, when the Weingrads were going to give me what they had saved, I was going to put it all in art storage. So I was packing up what little I had and flying up from Florida to Philadelphia. And I would be there for the great reveal out of the basement. And that was an amazing day. But before that, I stopped in at my stepfather's in Westchester, and I said, time to lend me these paintings because I'm going to, have them assessed or something like that. And he's like, oh, sure. I don't even think they belong to me. I think they were your mother's. And I thought, oh, if only I had asked before. So little did he expect, but I whipped out a garbage bag and all of these like bubble wrap and stuff. And I had them together in a trice and I took them away. But it was Easter Sunday. And so the trains out of Paoli or Exton, I think we went to, there were maybe two that day. And so I had spent the night at his house. I was covered with his cat's hair, like white hair all over my black raincoat. I was a mess. I'm always disheveled. I feel like I'm a disheveled person, and I'm often carrying large bundles of unwieldy art from one place to another, looking furtive. So there I am, like I've got my big suitcases from Florida. I'm a mess. I've got hair all over me, and now I have this garbage bag with these two paintings in it too. So I get on the train in Exton, and it's pretty empty. But it quickly filled up with women and girls looking beautiful for their Easter party, wherever they were going.
Yeah.
Nail polish, dresses in springtime pastel colors, and the main line, very beautiful. And they all moved away from me on the train. Nobody came near me as I was like trying to deal with all this stuff. And so I was so excited about all the artwork, and I realized I already looked a mess. And I was jaunting on the train with all of these things. And I just decided, you know what, I'm going to gloat. And I actually allowed a few cackles of laughter to come out of my mouth. And I must have looked very terrible. But what can you do? I figured I may as well enjoy the moment. And so there I was, cackling away on the train, looking just simply awful, I'm sure.
It reminds me of an episode of Antiques Roadshow or something, Emily, where you come jaunting in with your like plastic bag and you find out that it's worth, $30. That's not what. Anyway,
sad.
Yeah, that's what the vision there. So I want to just jump back for a second. There's actually let me ask this question. Well, let me jump back and then I'll ask the question. I want to go back to the reveal, the morning of the reveal, when you went to find what was housed. What was that moment like? Can you?
I think we were all a little astonished. I mean, Patricia and Ronald Weingrad were very close friends of Jim's during his life. And I don't know whether my mother had turned them off or whether it was me, but they were very protective of the work. And he had left them a note saying, all my artified things are for you. These are yours. So he willed them to them. And they safeguarded them for all those years. And I have to say that a major part of why I was able to face this and be aware and be able to see the opportunity when that ad came by was getting sober. That's a huge piece of my life. In 2003 was the last time I took a drink, and alcoholism was a big part of Jim's story as well. So it runs in the family. My mother used to like to call it the family curse. But there is recovery, and it's a beautiful thing. And without it, I couldn't have done any of this. And I'm sure I couldn't have faced, day after day, year after year, continuing to do this work. So I'm very grateful for that. And what was the question again? Oh, the day. Day.
Yeah, so, I'm just interested in this, in that moment when you were face to face with, probably, was it the largest acquisition of your father's work?
I think
in one place.
Yes, there were two main amazing ones, and there have been a few beautiful smaller collections. And I don't know whether I should be even naming names, but with the Weingrads and Patricia Wright, both of those are both Patties, which is very pataphysical. Those ladies both helped me put together the show at Slot in 2014, so I don't feel bad about revealing their names. But for other collectors, I don't know if I should. But anyway, that reveal was more like a whole morning. It just kept coming and coming and coming out of the basement. And it seemed to me, I can't speak for them, but it seemed to me that they were also just overwhelmed and surprised to see all that work again. And I was certainly overwhelmed. I mean, finding one piece is amazing to me. And to all of a sudden have maybe 50 come out of hiding, and they were in good shape. I mean, the things on paper don't like a basement, but the things were mostly canvases. And then the other big stash that was the widow's things were mostly personal items, but also a lot of stuff on paper. And she kept everything in an attic. So they were magically well preserved as well. And she had his ashes, which I was never expecting to find. And so that was pretty amazing. She saved his wallet, and just opening, like, there were a few things that really struck me there was the number one, the ashes. The second thing was his wallet and what he had in it, including he used to carry around an ad from Cessna torn out of a newspaper saying, have you ever wanted to fly a plane? For $5 and this coupon, you can have a flying lesson. And I just thought that was amazing. What a brilliant thing to be carrying around with you like that.
That was in his wallet?
Yeah. And so the wallet was a little gross, so I couldn't save it, but I saved the things that were in it. So overwhelming, I guess. It's like Christmas that just keeps coming.
Did you know they had your father's ashes as well, or was that a revelation when you got there?
They did not have his ashes. The ashes ended up in, they went from Philadelphia to New Jersey to Elida, Ohio, which is kind of an Amish area, very flat farmland. And that's where these relatives of the widow's partner after Jim lived. And they had trucked all the stuff over there, and we just went through the warehouse full of things, and there were his albums, his books, his boots, the American flag they used for his funeral, sculpture of him by another student, and all of the things from his medicine cabinet, like literally eye drops, toothpaste, toothbrush, deodorant. 43-year-old deodorant was amazing. And then there was this little wooden box, and I opened it, And inside was just this piece of cork and something, a little broken wooden African mask that was probably just a tourist thing. It wasn't pretending to be any kind of real thing. It was broken anyway. But when I opened this box, there was a smell in there. And you know how the memories come with smell. And I was, boom, in his studio with him as a little kid, and looking at his face, looking at me. And I look just like him, like I'm older than him now, but that was a surprise. I had never seen a photograph of him close up until I was in my 30s. And when I did, it was like looking in the mirror. And then I realized there's another reason all the adults who loved him were horrified to see me, was because I thought it was something I did, but it was because I looked just like him. Anyway, this smell reminded me of the day in his studio, and I quickly closed the box and I put it in a plastic bag, but you know, that smell has dissipated. But it reminded me of the only thing I remember him actually saying to me. He said that I should take this very seriously and remember it all my life. And I remember looking at him across, like we had all these paintbrushes and the art table between us, and I was like, what? And he said, never leave your brushes in the turpentine. And I remember looking, and there's these two big jars full of brushes festering in their turpentine between us. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Do what I say. Yeah. We have a bunch of questions, so I want to get to them in a second, but something that's sticking in my mind is you called them, I think did you say patties? Is that referring to Pataphysical?
The two ladies who gave me the biggest stashes, Patricia Weingrad and Patricia Wright, are both called Patty. And it didn't occur to me until later, but I was like, Patty, Pataphysics.
Oh, well, let's just do the Pataphysics for the unindoctrinated, which can you give us the sort of brief theory?
You know, some of this philosophy stuff goes right over my head, but I can say that pataphysics is an imaginary science invented by the French playwright Alfred Jarry around the turn of the century, right? And it's an imaginary science of solutions and exceptions. And I think Michaela Jameson said it really well in an article she wrote in the Philadelphia City paper when it was still extant in 2014, and Bob may have the link to that article. But I remember Michael Taylor saying that was one of the best definitions he had ever seen. Thank you, Bob. I found this also among his things. I think Patty Weingrad had this. It's a stamp, one of his original things. So pataphysics has inspired many artists over the years, including Brewton and Tom Chimes in Philadelphia. And the reason that you and I met, Tina, is because of the big Philadelphia à la Pataphysique conference that was held at University of Pennsylvania in 2014. And that conference was Jim's first show at Slot, his first solo in 43 years. So that was really exciting for me, and all thanks to Michael and Aaron Levy and Jean-Michel Rabate and the people who put that together, John Hean, Katie Price. And we had so much fun with that conference that they've collected some of the essays and thinking about pataphysics in contemporary times. And they've made a book of it, and it's edited by Katie Price and Michael Taylor, and it's coming out in the spring of 2022 from Penn State University Press, and it's called Pataphysics Unrolled. It has pieces by Craig Dworkin, John Hean, Michael Taylor's chapter on Jim will be in it. who else? Charles Bernstein, Orchid Tierney, Andrew Hugel is a big name in pataphysics. He wrote a book called Pataphysics, A Useless Guide, and that's helpful, I'm sure. So the short answer to can I define pataphysics is no.
Fair enough, but it gets us on our way. And I want to go back to the memoir and pull one of the questions in here. In your memoir, how much is your own emotional journey? How much is your own emotional journey, perhaps of your whole life, including childhood, versus the search for your father's work in history? How are you balancing your own emotional journey versus?
It's a good question. I'm trying to, when somebody says something like, when my stepfather said I just ignored Patty Weingrad, of course, and never told me that she was interested in showing me this work, I'm trying to be objective and just put it down there. The characters themselves are so interesting that I don't have to editorialize, and I tried to keep I try to make it readable and fun and not go on and on about myself. On the other hand, like when you're working with memoir, you're also invading everybody's privacy who's ever talked to you in your life, and your family and your friends. My mother was a writer, my grandmother was a writer, and my little brothers know very well how horrible it is when the neighbor kids get a hold of your parents' memoir and there's embarrassing stories about what you did when you were 2. So you have to tread carefully there, not to infringe on other people's privacy.
And how do you make that distinction? Is it like cringe factor inside where you get to a place where you think,
like my mother comes out badly. And if you do a story that's just about Jim, then my mother looks mean. And she looks like a mother who didn't pay any attention when I was falling apart, when I was 4 to like 13. But she wasn't like that. So I tried to bring in a balance there, that there were wonderful things about her. She had her limitations, but she was a very, I think, just had a rotten childhood herself. And in the 60s and early 70s, little children didn't go to therapy. There weren't any roadmaps for how do you deal with, how do you tell a child that not only is their father dead, but he killed himself. So trying to be fair, like if someone was funny, they have to be funny in their own words, and I'm laughing with them, not at them, mostly.
Mm-hmm. And the memoir, if I'm understanding you right, really came about because it was the most genuine, sort of authentic way you could go about both searching for the art and trying to piece together your life. Is that fair?
I think I thought that I was that I had something to offer here. Partly the experience of being able to take the worst thing that ever happened to you and turn it into something that is meaningful and gives you a great deal of joy. And the other part is just the nuts and bolts. How do you do this? How do you start a nonprofit? How do you do this? And I had to learn as I was going along. Like I didn't know all that well how to do a catalog raisonné, and now I have worked for another organization that was putting one together. So now I have a much better idea how do I get out of the habit of believing what why do I believe something? Why do I believe my parents broke up in 64? Was it 64 or 65? Like Michael Taylor taught me, look at the passport, look at the old passports, then you will get the travel records, not just, oh, I think it was this and this time, that kind of thing. So a little discipline, and finally, to give laughter. There are some stories that you just could not have made these things up. And I'm a writer. I write.
Yeah, you spent quite a few years right in Philadelphia working for, you talk a little bit about your time here in Philadelphia. You were WMMR for a while, right? And working in fun
in my 20s in Philadelphia. I worked at WMMR in 1985 and 86, just when album-oriented rock was becoming a big deal, and we kind of were kings of the town for a while in rock and roll. And Live Aid was happening right around then. But I never wanted to be on air, and I'm not even really much of a music person. I was just lucky enough to get a job there. So it was like working at a club. And from there, I went to the South Street Star, which was like even more of a club, underground newspaper, no money anywhere. And it was just scrappy fun working for Ron Kaplan on South Street. And I would be doing kind of everything. And I'd be typesetting. It came out on Thursdays, so probably Tuesday nights I was up until 4 a.m. typesetting, and then getting up and going to MMR in the day. And the back wall of the office abutted onto Dobbs, J.C. Dobbs nightclub, and so I would be rocking along, typing all night long, and one of the nicest people on South Street is Ken Queter, the troubadour of South Street. He's a poet and a folk singer and a rocker, and just a really nice guy. So got to meet a lot of interesting people on South Street, and then worked at the Philadelphia Art Alliance for Marilyn Goodman in 86, 88, 89. And she was doing some really interesting avant-garde things there, and that was fun. It was really fun to go to Invisible City's opening reception last January, the 2020, yeah. Sid Sax's big show there, because that was quite the party. That was a very nice opening.
And a lot of memory. I'm going to get to a couple more questions. Just see. This is can you tell us anything about the poem titled Key to Birmingham? Does that make sense?
Oh,
it's from Theodore.
Hi, Theodore. So Theodore Harris is a wonderful artist that we've gotten to know through the Philadelphia Avant-Garde Studies Consortium. And he's going to be on your show, isn't he, Tina?
It's coming up, yeah, March 27th.
He wrote a really neat response to the Key to Birmingham, which was one of my father's metal constructions. And I think it was 1965. And it's just a tourist key to the city of Birmingham, Alabama, and then the whitish silvery metal square, and then a slash of red paint for all the basically violence against the civil rights advocates down there. So there were a number of anti-war pieces, and this one is the most, I think, direct statement about civil rights that my father did, was Key to Birmingham. But you had to know, that blood was being shed in 1965 down there to get the piece, kind of. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think, Emily, even back when you were on your decided to seek a life of sobriety, that you had the seeds of this journey that you would be investing yourself in so much? Do you think that there was that was part of your decision
to get sober?
Yeah, that there was a life ahead that needed and required you.
I think that the decision to get sober was either just do that or die. I mean, toward the end of a person's journey with addiction, it seems to me that you are very much, you don't want to live, but you're afraid to die. And you got to ask for help. And so I was very, very fortunate that I did. And it has been a wonderful thing. And I think it gave me the strength and the wherewithal to do this. But I had no idea this marvelous pataphysical adventure was waiting for me. No idea.
Yeah. Do you see yourself as an adventurer? Do you feel like you have an adventurous spirit?
I think that I'm more of a worker. Like, I will do this work, and I love this art, but I'd rather be holed up in my studio actually painting or writing than out adventuring. But this has been like a gift from my father. It feels like there's a painting that my mother destroyed called Letter to My Daughter, and it was big. And it was covered with graffiti, and I can't really read what was in it on the negative. I have a negative of it, of a photo of it, but it says something like, if you ever need to something, just borrow Alfred Jarry's bicycle. And that's completely pataphysical, and it feels as if this is just a major adventure that was handed to me by my father. And the kindness of strangers.
Yeah. I think that's the note, the note on which we will sadly end this conversation, Emily. It's been just a true pleasure. I could keep talking. I think there's so much to dig into here, and I wish you the very best on this.
Thank you, Tina.
On this journey.
You. And thank you, Bob Schmidt, and thank you, Erica Hoschler,
for manning the plane here. I want you to come back and talk about the progress with your memoir and how that's going.
Thank you, Tina, so much. Happy day after birthday.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thank you for being here, Emily. And we'll make sure for everybody who's watching the links, get the links in there so that you can go visit the website, the James E. Brewton website, and discover more about all the work Emily's doing. Emily, thank you so much, and best to you. And on next week's Into the Absurd, we are going to be joined by Philadelphia actor Michael Toner, who's been working in this town and around the country and the world for so many years, and his specialty is Irish theater. And I can't wait to talk to him about his experience as an actor, director, and a dialect coach working on Beckett and O'Neill and Brian Friel, and you name it, Michael Toner has done it. And Patrick Devine, who is a veteran, he and Michael worked together on a project, a really wonderful project for veterans, and we're going to be talking more about that on next week's show. It's going to be very fun, and we hope that you'll join us next Saturday at 5 p.m. here on Zoom or on Facebook Live. And in the meantime, just hoping everybody out there is getting a vaccine, and keep your mask on, keep your fingers crossed, and hopefully we'll be on stage with you at some point in 2021. Until then, we look forward to seeing you here Saturdays at 5 p.m. Be safe, be well, take care.